stuff. You're not looking at a virtual world, you are actually performing a role in it. And we play a part in that world itself, which is why this form of media is more akin to everyday life than it is to other forms of media itself. Which is why any ideological content in a virtual world becomes very important, because we are being asked to perform particular actions which are ideological in character if we are part of that world. So, the critique of video games I want to draw on here mostly, and it's given it as reading for this week, is David Gunkel's book, Gaming System. Gunkel argues in that book that content for any new world comes from discourses of the colonialization of the West and American expansionism into the continent of North America in the 1800s. Gunkel's really specific about this. Colonialism for him, and the colonialism he draws on to explain how video game worlds are constructed, is this specific form of colonialism. It is white Americans going into a remainder of the United States through the 19th century and colonizing that space. And how did they do this? They went in, identified who was there, who had always been there, Native Americans, and murdered them in various different ways. They did not try to integrate these people into their society or way of life. They instead decided we're going to eradicate them and replace them with our way of life. Get rid of these, let's have us here instead. Because America was full of good stuff, like cattle, and oil, and coal, and crops, etc., etc. It's all just lying out there, waiting to be found. Let's get these people who are on top of it out the fucking way so we can take it. And that basically is the story of American colonialism. I've oversimplified it somewhat, but it's actually not that much more complex. So, we have used this metaphor of new worlds to describe virtual and digital worlds throughout the creation of the early creation of cyberspace, for example, in the 1990s, how the internet was going to be a different space. It was this metaphor of the new world which was used. And even at that time, people were picking up on this, where, you know, the new world would be settled, the new digital world would be settled and colonized in particular ways. Others have identified this many, many years ago. In 1996, Sardar, computer games are an extension of European voyages of discovery. What are we asked to do in most games? We're asked to go out, if we put it in a 1990s context, because games perhaps were simpler then. You're asked as a character to go out there, usually with a gun, kill all the things around you, get to the end of the level, and then that level belongs to you. You've conquered the space, it's now yours. If you think of a map, for example, in a traditional, you know, game map with this, very often I think of this always in terms of the Far Cry series. What you're asked to do is change the colour of the map. You go through the game space, killing that lot of people there, and that lot of people there, and then the map changes to reflect that it now belongs to you. And then how do you win the game? How do you get to 100%? Well, you make the map change all its colours and get rid of all these pesky little indigenous people who want to live their lives in a different way to you. Instead, we're going to bring democracy.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, sounds very familiar, right? Familiar from the history of human behaviour. Civilization series is a great example of this, for example. In effect, video games act as a new form of utopian fiction, where we are actually the protagonists. Utopian fictions are places where, you know, pieces of literature or pieces of media where we go forward and conquer and enforce the righteousness of our own ideologies and moral order on spaces or people which have no moral order or have a deficient one or one which is not good for us, etc., etc. So, any kind of discourse around a new world is inevitably really a colonialist discourse. just want to draw on Alexander Galloway here. Galloway, this is literally the first thing he writes in this book. All video games are utopian projects as they create worlds in which certain laws are simulated, and others are not. The freedom to selectively simulate is a scaffolding for utopia. The choices that are made in games by the designers tell us a lot about the ideology in it, because games simulate our world, but they only do it selectively so. One of the really interesting things I find about female characters in games, this is going to sound awfully insensitive to the women in the room, and it doesn't mean to, okay? But if you're playing like Tomb Raider or something like that, or like Far Cry 6, or any number of games which have a female character as the lead character, even something weirdly like Life is Strange, which has a pretty good sort of handle on female difference. Why doesn't the game stop? Take a game like Far Cry 6, right? Now, theoretically, over that game creates a timescape where there's day, night, day, night, day, night, right? So in the game time, the campaign to complete Far Cry 6, I'm guessing would be about 3 months of game time. Probably about 30 hours of your time, but about 3 months in terms of the game that does it. Now, my character in Far Cry 6 was like a 20-year-old woman. What didn't she do in those 3 months?
Sleep.
She slept. Nobody wants to say it.
PMS.
Do you all know what I'm thinking about? What's that?
PMS.
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
PMS.
PMS. Well, we don't have to put it in those terms because that's not ubiquitous. But yeah, she never had a menstrual cycle. Is that no? None of the game backstory did not fill me in with the details of my character had reproductive system issues, or perhaps she'd had a hysterectomy or something like that. That wasn't in there. Or she'd gone through early menopause. That wasn't apparent in the game. Could have given me that context if they wanted to explain this, but there was none of that. It's like, okay, well, what other things went on in this game where that's not commensurate with how women experience reality on a daily basis? There was quite a lot, actually. The game designers, Far Cry 6, decided that they wouldn't simulate that. They wouldn't simulate that experience of being a woman. In fact, I think they looked at it and thought, we're not going to simulate much about being a woman. What we're going to do is make an avatar that looks like a woman, and we're going to fuck the rest out because we don't actually understand women at all, because when you look at the list of people who actually designed that game, there ain't any women on it. So it's an interesting omission here, and of course this is a very ideological point. In sort of a colonialist utopia, do we care about women? Not really. Fuck, do we care? Colonialism is a very patriarchal ideology. So even if we have a dystopian world, this is always going to be utopian. And the point I want to make here is that that utopian vision is usually a white man's vision of a utopia. The design of virtual worlds is almost exclusively by white men. And so when we look at what are the aims of virtual worlds and how are virtual worlds wonderful, and how can this be a great thing, is usually the vision of a particular group of people that is articulated. And we have some questions.
Yeah. What about just women just emasculating simply masculine traits?
That's not really a woman, is it?
Yeah.
That's a man's view of a woman. Yeah.
I was just thinking, is it necessary to even, it doesn't, because women have periods, but is it necessary to include that? You don't include a bloke having a shitter and piss, because that does just detract from
Or
the game,
woman, because I understand they do that.
That's true.
What about the age
but
restriction?
Is it necessary? I don't know. Well, that's really the question being answered.
How would that affect? Because if it was you have a period, it's emotional dysregulation and stuff like that.
How do you know?
But like if you,
I'd say we're very close to mansplaining at this point. In fact, I think if that's the line of mansplaining, you're over here somewhere.
how would you, if you were to make a game and you include that, like how would you put that in a game without making
I don't
it
know,
seem
ask a
like
woman.
Yeah, but why would you need to put it in? I mean, it's to make
The game,
make it
if you
more
want an authentic experience of what it is to be a female combatant in that game world, maybe have a female combatant, build it in. There's no reason why that mechanism can't be brought in.
Yeah, true.
The whole thing is, it's just it looks like a woman, but it's literally a man.
Yeah. That's
It's
my
just
point.
meant to be
So the
eye-candy.
classic point by Lara Croft, right? Lara Croft doesn't actually even look like a woman, but you know, if she was a woman, she'd have incredible problems with her posture. But like, she's not a woman. She's a man. Just because the avatar has been made to look like a woman, she doesn't do anything that a woman does. She doesn't do anything different. They could have just made that game with a male character. It wouldn't change the game in any fucking way if it was a male character playing that game. The only thing you would have to take out is the slightly salacious grunts that she makes when she climbs up a ledge. That's it, which was a major selling point of the game in 1996.
Were there any age restrictions that if we put those details, then the game has to be like from?
We have to put age restrictions for natural fucking
menstruation
biological
works
processes. I
with
think that's really problematic.
You know, like The Sims then, do they have that? As like a female
Ask
character?
a Sims player.
They have mods for it, and people download it, but even
They
then
have to
still-
mod the
Yeah.
game to do
But
it.
then
Yeah.
EA
You have to be a
is-
PC player to do it.
EA is dominated by males anyway, so
Yeah,
they
yeah,
ignore
fuck
the
me, I
fact
can assure you
that
no, there's
women's
no
products
female
is
executives at EA. I can assure you of that.
But like, it's just like, you know, biology, you know, like you would be
Guys, weirdly, I appreciate the point that you make. I do appreciate the point you're making. But I want you all to sit back and just disengage for a second from this conversation. If you ever, I am not having to go at you, okay? I'm not having to go at any other man in this room. I'm not having to go at the women in the room either. If you ever want to have an illustration of how the patriarchy works, you are experiencing it. What we're fundamentally asking here is it essential to represent women accurately in video games? For our enjoyment of the game? And kind of we can argue, no. Welcome to the patriarchy, everyone. That's exactly what it is. Your point is, I recognise, Aidan, you are not making that point to make some kind of misogynistic point. You are actually trying to engage here with the idea of game dynamics and game mechanics, and would it, and you're essentially asking, you know, would it add anything to the game experience if this would? My argument to that would be, yes, it would add something to the game experience because it's simply something we don't see in games in any way, shape or form. It will, now, in particular, when I think we do week 9 of this module, that will make a lot more sense, the point I've just made. You can foreshadow that for now, and I think the point is sensible in itself anyway. The wider point about this sort of digital worlds and utopianism, and it really does grind now into this ideological perspective as well, is if you design video games with multiple different characters, if you want to be diverse in your game, how do you even understand the term diversity? That is an ideological position. And the video game industry, by and large, understands diversity in terms of representation. In terms of women look like this, men look like this. In terms of action, behaviour, emotion, etc., the video game industry don't want to get into that. Because it's difficult for the video game industry to do that. It really is. Because primarily, the video game industry is staffed by white men. And white men have a uniquely poor understanding of women. Because they're not women. It's a really simple thing, yeah. I don't want to labour this point too much, but like, men and women, different. That much we do know. And the lived-in experience of the world for men is different than the lived-in experience of the world for women. In many different ways, in a cultural way, in a physical way, in an emotional way, etc. These are all, these are fucking axiomatic truths. The game industry isn't very interested in those things. Because one, it's hard for them to actually render any of that difference, because it's largely made up of men anyway, so they don't have very limited understanding of what this means. And two, because just as you said, but what I'm gonna do is take your point and manipulate it here. This is very important, okay? This is not Aidan's point, I am twisting it. But when I twist it, what I say is this, and this actually goes to your player 1, player 2 thing that you were talking about, Maddie, and you were talking about, Nikki, right? Why should we even fucking care? Is the actual point here. Because the video game industry isn't just populated by white men, its actual primary market is white men. That's the player 1, player 2 argument, right? The player 1 for video games is you, and you, and me, and you, exactly. Okay, that's who the game industry is for. So we don't have to make realistic women.
There's no
This is
demand.
not for women anyway. The fucking game industry isn't for women, it's for men. You know? So why should we bother? Why not just make female characters which act and behave in ways which are not commensurate with being a woman anyway? You talk about those suffragettes, right? In Red Dead Redemption 2. What are they like?
Fucking annoying.
Yeah. What does that say? You know, people in the world who advocate for female empowerment and for equal rights between men and women are fucking annoying. And what do we want to do with them? We want to tie them to trains so they fly like kites, and then they eventually die. The end of the rope eventually breaks and they fly off and go, and then you see a very amusing death scene. Yeah. The only thing more fun in that game actually than killing the suffragettes is killing the Ku Klux Klan people. That's actually a lot of fun. But I'm kind of foregrounded everything else I want to talk about in this lecture at this point anyway. So, when games are created, they create a world and create a narrative. What they are doing is creating a discourse. Now, I would have talked about this multiple times in different modules across your degree, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but as Stuart Hall says, when statements about a topic are made within a particular discourse, the discourse makes it possible to construct the topic in a certain way. It also limits the other ways in which the topic can be constructed. Now, this discussion now becomes even more interesting. If we take Stuart Hall's ideas about discourse and apply them to video games, let's say we take that topic of how women are constructed in video games, what the game is doing is telling us that we can talk about women in particular contexts and can't talk about them in other contexts. So when I say that women's agency is limited in games, in that they're just men with a different look, what is that telling us about how we see women in society? They're just like men, right? Just like perhaps a weaker version of men. There's no difference for them. Well, what does that mean in practice? Do women need spaces of their own? No, because they're just like men. So you don't need any stuff. You know, it's all bullshit though. Because you're just the same as us anyway. It's just you're a slightly smaller, weaker version of us. It takes longer to complete the game because you get tired quicker. Apparently, that's one of the things in Far Cry 6. Unbelievably. So it's actually constructing ways in which we can talk about things. That's why the Red Dead Redemption 2 one becomes more interesting again. It's like, here's a historical reenactment of the suffragettes. How do we talk about the suffragettes today? Well, if your only knowledge of the suffragettes is from that game, and believe me, there will be quite a lot of people out there whose only knowledge of the suffragettes has come from playing Red Dead Redemption 2. It's sold, had multiple millions of copies. Suffragettism isn't actually taught in school curricula. So, let's say that's all we know of it. That's the discourse that we understand the suffragette movement through. What does that say? Well, suffragettes were really fucking annoying. But it was okay because you could throw a rope around them and kill them. It's not a great message. It really isn't a great message. the game and games construct ways that we can talk about things. Now, when you're thinking about the game that you're looking to play, say we've got Call of Duty, what kind of discourse does Call of Duty create about other nationalities and races? Now it becomes important, right? What does EA Sports do with regards to how we can talk about different groups, different people?
American imperialism.
Well, that's basically my argument of this whole lecture, right? This is an unwritten but let's take the unwritten out. This is as written as anything. This is as written as anything we can have. You know, what does The Sims tell us about how we should treat other people? For example. So, games are always constructing discourses. A game is therefore just like a discourse, a group of statements about something. That's how a game operates. Red Dead Redemption is really interesting ideologically. I've actually written a book chapter on how Red Dead Redemption is a colonialist game. It's waiting to be published now, but I'm happy to send it to you for reference, all right? What Red Dead Redemption 2 does is organise our knowledge and understanding so that certain ideas about the West appear true. That's not how it was. That's not how, but this is true for all media, especially if we look at cinema, for example. We're tempted to look at cinema and think, oh, that's how it was. But it's an organisation of a certain set of statements to make something appear like that's how it was. It's not how it was. It wasn't the lived experience of something. Discourse constructs a certain set of beliefs so that you're then held in common by a number of people. I'll give you an example of this, which is really, really controversial, and especially controversial in the context of what's happening now as well, right now at this moment. But I'm going to do it anyway, because life's no fun without a bit of controversy, right? Could somebody name me a film about the Holocaust?
Schindler's List.
Schindler's List. That's not about the Holocaust.
Jewish people in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
No,
Is it?
Boy in the striped pajamas.
Boy in the Striped Pajamas is about the Holocaust. I don't think Schindler's List is.
It's about someone
And
that's
the Holocaust was an event where 6 million people died. Schindler's List about 600 people who lived. That's not the experience of most people of the Holocaust, I don't think. Do you see how a certain set of statements are put together by Schindler's List? That this is how the Holocaust was. Well, it wasn't for 6 million people, I can assure you. It ended in a very different fucking way. But that film has constructed in our minds, because of its success, and it is a very, very good film, I won't say otherwise, but that film has constructed an image in our minds of this is what the Holocaust was like. We've all seen it, right? They show it in schools and stuff like that, right? As, you know, a testament to how it was. It's really, really problematic in that, because for the vast majority of people caught up in the Holocaust, that's not how it was. They didn't survive. We didn't have a benevolent sort of owner of a factory who protected them from, you know, persecution and the program that was going on in Europe at that time. They died. That's the reality of the Holocaust. But we accept the vision that was given to us in that film as being authoritative, right? It's a piece of fiction. It's really important to note that it's based on real events, but it's a piece of fiction. That's what media is. It's a mediation of that. All media is mediation. All media does is mediate. But the discourses that are constructed in that mediation become a shared set of beliefs. Now, for video games, that's much more powerful, because we actually enact those beliefs in our performance in the game. So, if Red Dead Redemption 2, right, what's the basic outline story of Red Dead Redemption 2? Bunch of outlaws living in the mountains in the snow and that, get shit tired of freezing to death, come down from the mountains, and start taking over pieces of land as they go forward, robbing and taking whatever they can until they get to an end point. That, my friends, is a colonialist project. And we're not just asked to observe this. In order to succeed, you do it. That's the important difference. In order, Call of Duty, whole point is to take this country back from this insurgent group. You go and do it. You go and blow the crap out of those people. Yes, it feels so good to succeed. Just like America did in Iraq in 2003, right? Oh, then it gets icky when we think of it in that way. So, and then you have a whole bunch of people thinking, hey, that's how it should be. Because we hold all those discourses together. So, when we have discourses, those beliefs are taken as granted as the truth. People make sense of the world through those models and discourses. We see the world through them, and everyone does this. So if you have a predominant discourse in a very important media that has a way of affecting people that no other media does, that women are just the same as men, they are not different, then you have a discourse about women's role in society. And through that discourse you will start to see women in society that way too. That's not what feminism means, women just the same as men. No feminist has ever expressed that statement. Feminists might want equality with men, but they don't say women and men are the same. That's a very important distinction. The video game industry very often does say women and men are exactly the same. And that is an important.
Isn't it just because of there is no demand in the market? Isn't it just simply as that, or there's something more?
Yeah, but okay, but, there's probably no demand in the market for seatbelts.
Yeah, that's true.
Did you say there's no demand?
There's no demand in the market for electric cars. Well, we won't fucking die if we don't have them.
Did you say there's no demand in the market as well because there's nothing that envisions women in a
Exactly. There's no demand in the market for accurate representation of women in video games because it's never been done.
Ah, okay.
We don't know if there's a demand in the market if nobody's tried it.
There is. I mean, there's a lot of women playing esports actually.
Oh yeah, oh no, yeah, well, yeah. One of the point I'm making, I'm not doubting the existence of women gamers.
Yeah.
In fact, the stats back up that 45 to 50% of gamers are women, which we would expect given the composition of society. It's just that we don't know if the argument of the video game industry itself is, well, we don't know if there's a demand for games like this. Well, yeah, you don't know because you've never fucking tried. And moreover, you don't know how to try because you're all men. You don't write convincing characters which are women. You don't write characters which have any kind of position as women in that world. You just avoid that altogether. So the idea of that is actually the argument that the video game industry makes. That we don't make convincing women characters because women don't play. Well, they do. Okay, so women aren't. But and you get into this stumbling thing with people. It's like basically you don't make them because you can't be fucked, can you? I mean that's the truth of it. So. You might think, what has discourse got to do with this? Well, power is expressed in ideologies, and ideologies are legitimised through discourses. This is classically what Stuart Hall argues in his work. Right? How does all this fit together? Discourses are embedded in texts, ideologies are legitimised through discourses, and ideologies work to maintain power structures within a society. Therefore, in the video game industry, this has been a really productive mechanism for doing this with regards to sort of the inherent misogyny of the video game industry. It doesn't discount from anything about colonialism either, because colonialism itself is a highly patriarchal and misogynistic exercise as well. I'm going to skip over a couple of these because I don't need these. What I do need to do is talk a little bit about, I'm going to skip over that exercise because I've got time as well. But I to talk about how we understand the ideological content of games. And I think, okay, games have particular ideologies embedded in them. So fucking what? I'm an adult. I can recognise those ideologies. I can debate with myself about the efficacy of those ideological positions, and I can come to my own conclusions, right? I am not beholden to the ideological content of games. Wrong. Wrong in a very, very subtle way, but wrong nevertheless, and that comes back to the idea that we play. We do not observe, we play. So, Ian Bogost's work is the most important work that we'll probably encounter with regards to assignment 1 in this module. What Ian Bogost argues, and he completely revolutionised the field of video game studies when he did this, because he went from looking at narratives and representation to looking at play itself, and what, in particular, games ask you to do. For Ian Bogost, the understanding of the ideological content of a game always comes down to one thing. What are you asked to do? What is the game? How is the game been designed to make you do things? When you can understand that, then you can understand the ideological content of the game. Even something as simple as EA Sports 24. What is it actually asking you to do?
Depends what
At a
mode
really
you're playing.
basic level,
Um,
what is it asking you to do?
build your dream team
Mm-hmm.
and compete against other people
And
move up the ranks.
For what purpose?
To get more rewards, to build more.
Yeah, you're dancing around it. For what purpose?
The best.
To be the best.
I'm not
To win. To be the
I'm shit, so I can't really
well,
say
yeah,
that.
but you might well be shit, but I mean, you're better than me. I can assure you. It's irrelevant. We're all put on a path. No part of that game is saying, you know, here, be fucking Newport County. You know, they're shit. They're never going to win anything. Be more like Newport County. That's not how the game is built. It's like, you know, this game isn't asking you, yeah, be Hartlepool. That's fucking rubbish. Like, you know, you can be happy being bottom dwelling shit over the hundreds of years. No, the game is propelling you towards winning. Yeah? The game is built around the idea that you will progress being a very important word, towards winning something. That you will eventually win. How about cooperating with other people? That's kind of nice, isn't it? It's alright, that, isn't it? When you chat with people and you share, you feel better because you've done that. That's kind of nice. What game does that?
CS does. A little bit.
No, it fucking doesn't.
Yeah, I suppose.
It doesn't do that at all. This is such an ideological game. What's the purpose of that game?
Yeah, but like you cooperate with your 4 other team members
To do what?
to kill another team.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's
Let's try and take killing stuff out of the equation here, because that's very ideological. The idea that victory is achieved by killing other. It's like, yeah, Fortnite's really cooperative. Yeah, you cooperate to fucking kill everyone. That's not what I'm talking about, right?
But what's wrong with that?
Well?
It takes 2.
Here well, you want examples of how discourses work. What's wrong with killing everyone?
No, it's just about the isn't it the collaboration by nature? That's basically reinforcing military. So military people work together like American face.
Sure, yeah.
So that's why it's in the games, but it's still
To what
collaboration
end?
by nature.
Yeah, but cooperation isn't an ideology.
Yeah.
The ideology comes from the outcome.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. What about having a game where the outcome is, have a nice cup of coffee? Well, Minecraft is interesting in that as well.
I mean, there's the killing aspect.
It certainly is.
But you can ignore
I'm
it.
always amused with, every couple of months when I'm on TikTok, I get a new version of Auschwitz that's been made in Minecraft. That always happens as well, and you think, yeah. But I think the point is a good one. Minecraft is a good example of a game which you can have different ends. You can build something just because it's kind of nice to hang out there, and you can invite other people to do that. That's kind of cool. I don't like that. But The vast majority of games don't ask you to do things. You know, they ask you to do other stuff. What Bogost encourages us to do is look at it like this. The authorship of rules of behaviour in games and the construction of dynamic models based on those rules are critical. We should always look at who has written the rules and why, and what do the rules make us do. So who writes the rules, why have they done it, what commercial and institutional interests are involved, and what are the politics of those rules themselves. What political position do we come to? And overwhelmingly, we come to an ideological political position of colonialist adventure. Game, take something like Halo, that is a classic colonialist text. You're out in whatever world it is, outer space, what are you going to do? Kill all that shit and take it over. It's a classic of the kind as well. It's far from being the only game that does that. At least it does it with a bit of panache. And actually has some political commentary in it as well, which is interesting. The vast majority of games don't have that kind of insight. We call this procedural rhetoric. So procedural rhetoric, there are many types of rhetoric in the world. I am a rhetorician, for example. You should, you know, you're in the third year now. What you should have come to realise if you do a module with me is that I'm trying to convince you that the world is a particular way. Many of you will have done the social media module with me last year, and I can try to convince you in that of a particular way of thinking about social media. Social media is the worst fucking thing that has ever happened. You want to see how I've redesigned it for next year? Holy shit, it's even worse. Basically, within 2 weeks, I want people to realise that social media has made them into narcissists. And then they're going to unpick why they're a narcissist. It's going to be fun. I'm going to ruin an entire generation of people. This is the problem when 60 odd people select your module in the second year. It makes you really fucking angry because of all that marking. So, yeah. I'm going to take it out on them. Procedural rhetoric. Rhetoric means a way of persuading. Rhetoric traditionally has referred to oral cultures where people would speak in particular ways and they would convince others to take upon their views. We have numerous rhetorical devices in the media. The practice of journalism, for example, one could argue is entirely a practice of rhetoric itself. Certainly if you're going to be a PR person, that's what you're going to do. You're going to persuade people to do things. That is what rhetoric is. Now, for Ian Bogost, what games do, the computational rules of digital games are rhetorical. They convince you and persuade you that a particular way of doing things is the right way of doing things. Through the rules, which have been written and created by designers. They do not pass down from above or anything like that. They are simply constructs made by the game designers. This convinces you that a particular course of action or particular view of the world is the correct one. The expression of meaning comes from the player interaction with the game mechanics itself. How we make progress in a game convinces us that this is how we make progress. So in a game like FIFA/EA, how do we make progress in life? We start from this point and we add. What is the commodity that we add to do that? Money. And this is what progress is. Getting wealthier. The measure by which we make progress in our lives is by looking at how much money we have in the bank at this point and how much we have at this point. And if at that point it is more than at that point, we have made progress in our lives. Spoiler alert, there are other ways you can make progress in your life. It does not just come down to one. You might have a more interesting hairstyle. That is progress. You might cover yourself with tattoos. That is progress. I'm calling it fucking progress anyway, because it's the only progress I've ever made.
It costs money.
Hmm?
It costs money.
What? To have tattoos?
Yeah, unless you do it yourself. But then it still costs money to get equipment.
Don't cost that much. It costs less than buying a shit car or something. Okay? So, we don't need to focus on the visual, the oral, and the temporal aspects of games. Far too much of game studies was committed to looking at the visual. It was an extension, if you like, film studies and television studies, looking at how things were put together in terms of representation, looking at how women were literally represented in particular ways, without considering what Bogos uncovered, and he wrote about Lara Croft when he was doing this in Tomb Raider, was, well, yeah, she looks like a woman, but she ain't a woman. She doesn't do anything that differentiates her from male characters. There's no point of difference here. She might as well be a man. Because the way that the things that you're asked to actually do is, is much more important. I use this game as an example here, DEFCON. DEFCON is a browser game which anyone can play. It doesn't cost anything to play. The purpose of the game is to enact a perfect thermonuclear war. So what you do is you position all your attack subs and missile silos and so on, while the other side is doing it. You can pick be America or Russia in this, and then you launch your attack, and no one can win, because nobody can actually win a nuclear war. So the whole point is, it doesn't matter how you play it, what manner you do it, what order you do things in, where you attack first, you'll never win. Everyone dies at the end, because that's what happens in a nuclear war, everyone dies. That game characterises a particular idea about the futility of war, for example. It is embedded within the rules of the game. Just a show of hands, has anyone actually played Bioshock? Ah, few, that's good. Bioshock is a first-person shooter from 2007. I'm almost certain there's going to be a remake of this in the next couple of years.
There's already been a remaster of it a few years ago.
There has, which I've played and which is alright. You might think, okay, what's the rules in Bioshock? Bioshock is a very, very interesting game, ideologically. Embedded in its rules is the idea of forced choice. That there is no such thing as a free choice to do things. You only ever have choices between things which have already been decided. It's like, what were your choices this morning? Wake up and come here, or stay in bed, right? That's a forced choice. You didn't have the freedom to, like, go on a cruise. That's not available to you guys right now. Maybe one day in the future. But you'll never have the freedom to wake up in the morning and say, oh, fuck it, I'm going on a cruise. Because society says that you have to come into this place at this time, these tasks in order to have this shit at the end of it, because if you don't have this shit, then your car and your home, etc., all gone away, and then you're living on the street begging for money. So unless you do any choices of the right thing we have, are elusive. Bioshock illustrates this by putting the player in a position where they believe that they are making progress through the game, and that the choices they make are actually benevolent choices to help people. But it was revealed at the end of it that there was no such thing. You were manipulated to do a particular set of aims to help a character who you thought was your friend.
Yeah.
Every trigger for action in the game is a character asking, saying, would you kindly do that? And then you go off and do it. And
Right
actually,
from the
you've
very
wiped out
beginning.
everyone on the basis of that person will help, and it turns out that's your enemy.
The first line that character says to you is, would you kindly pick up the radio?
Yeah, exactly.
From the very first
Yeah.
line, it's there.
So, Robert Jackson, who's a friend of mine, argues in his analysis of Bioshock that games are very complex procedural modelling systems that constitute a bundle of forced choices. And his argument about forced choices is really important here. That actually games don't give us freedom of choice. Game worlds are designed to give us forced choices. We repeat particular rules until they become second nature to us. And what Robert argues is that Bioshock actually embodies the worst of capitalist logic. Offers us the ambiguity that we're free to choose, but actually gives us such a limited set of choices we can do that we're actually being controlled. It's like a little bit, I'm kind of down on higher education in a lot of ways, right? But for many of you, there's no choice. It's higher education on what? Get a job? Do what? Doing what? you make money without a degree these days? What do you do at 18? If you're not going to university, where'd you go and work in the fucking range or something? Think you're going to make it big? There's not many choices out there. We're given the illusion, is that, yeah, you don't have to go to university. You can, go out and, what job? No fucking jobs. There's no jobs out there. And if there are jobs out there, think for 18-year-olds with no experience, I can assure you. Look in the paper and say, must have a degree. Oh fuck. Must have a degree. Sweeping up in Tesco, must have a degree. Fuck. It's a forced choice. You know, you've had the choice. You've chosen to come to university, have you? Forced choices are all across the place in the capitalist world. We're given the illusion that we have free will and to be able to choose different things we can. We're actually given a very limited set of choices that we can make. Bioshock embodies that really, really cleverly. As a game, it actually looks at how structural decisions have already been made about people's lives, which they're not aware of, because the structure itself is kind of invisible. Okay, I know we've got to finish. I never get to the end of these bloody things. It's terrible, isn't it? So how do we conclude this? Well, the virtual or synthetic worlds of digital games act as new territories, but the power relationships and ideologies communicated discursively through games and play correspond to dominant ideologies of not only elites, but specifically the epistemological elites of digital games. That's a term that needs a lot of unpacking in epistemological elites. It's a very simple term though. Epistemology refers to knowledge. In the world of video games, there is an elite that holds the knowledge about how games are produced. Designers, programmers, writers, etc. They work for a limited number of companies. They're in a very privileged position. Although we've seen the final lecture of the module, that privileged position is actually pretty precarious. They all tend to look the same, sound the same, do the same things, went to the same schools, did the same university courses, watch the same television, watch the same news, films, play the same video games as one another. It's a very homogenized group. They are what we call an epistemological elite. They are an elite based on the knowledge that they hold. They may not know much about anything else, but because they know about a certain group of things, they are an elite in it. That group, male, well-educated, wealthy, right of centre, capitalist, has particular ideologies. And as they design games, those ideologies are written into the rules of the game. It doesn't have to be deliberate, and I wouldn't argue it is always deliberate. It can be a bias which is actually subconscious in nature rather than a conscious one. Whilst we play those games, we are exposed to that ideological position through what we are asked to do in the game. How we act in the game becomes our way of understanding that ideology. And what Ian Bogost argues is that that becomes our model for action. I know that there are people getting antsy because they have to get out of here. So go, 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 and I will see you next week. It's only for dissertation stuff anyway, nobody's interested. I promise this week I will send an email about